All right, I am Jeff Chiba Stearns. I am conducting this interview with the lovely Marie Fleming tonight on behalf of Spark, the animation festival, which is, I guess, happening this fall, which is actually probably going to happen now because, they'll be watching it now, whoever's watching this. But yeah, I just want to introduce Marie Fleming. I don't want to go through a giant list of like the bios. Everyone does that at the beginning. I think as we get into our conversation, we're going to learn a lot about the work you've done, a lot about the work you are doing, and not just film, but a lot of different projects that you've been involved in over your very illustrious career as an artist, filmmaker, and author, everything, basically. And I gotta say, when I think about you and thinking about you as an artist and as a filmmaker, what comes to mind is prolific. You've got a huge body of work that you've done. You're eclectic. It's you don't really stick to just one style. You've worked in many areas, from live action to animation, to experimental, to blending everything together and in between, which I really sort of admired, even with my own filmmaking as well, and looking up to you as someone who has been a mentor to me. I think if we have to look back, to when we first met, I thought about this earlier because, we have a history. It's not just that we both have kind of like mixed Asian ancestry, but that's also kind of how we sort of met. Because I remember years ago, this would have been about 2000, I'm going to say 4, maybe 2003. I was working on a project, right? And I think this is, like I said, your name came up as someone to help produce the project because I was a green filmmaker working with the CBC. Nobody wanted to, they were like, we're not going to work with you unless you have a production company helping you out. And I did not have a production company. And I was like, everyone's like throwing names at me. And then your name came up. And of course I knew your work because I went to Emily Carr, and we'll talk about your education as well, being an alumni from Emily Carr as well. And it kind of was like sort of learning a bit more about your background. I'm like, this could work because knowing that you're working on The Magical Life of Long Tack Sam at the time, and your Chinese heritage as well, that film I was working on was looking at my Japanese Canadian heritage. So that was cool, that I really felt that period in my life, you took me under your wing. This is when you were at
Global Mechanic.
Yeah,
right.
at the time. And so it was through Global Mechanic. And actually a lot of crazy things came from that as well, working with Ruth Vincent as well.
I introduced you to Ruth.
Yeah, for years, and she helped co-produce a lot of the work I've done. And also I found this, which I think you might remember doing. Do you remember this?
Yes, the Animation Award. I started at Real Asian.
You did, 2007. Look at that. See how this comes around full circle? This comes around full circle, Marie Fleming.
An original AMF artwork.
It is. You handmade the certificate that I still hang up behind me. So every time I Zoom without this banner, everyone sees your lovely work. And I think it's been going on now. There's been an animation award. I've started sponsoring it too. So the money went back to the festival.
Well, the whole idea of that was for citizen support the arts, right? That it was supposed to be anonymous. I mean, and that I would get people to match, the donation, that you don't need a lot of money to support the arts. And I thought it would be a great, initiative, but it was hard, but it's hard for them to get people to continue supporting. And I believe now it's going to be called the Michael Fukushima.
Oh, is it? Well, for a few years, he actually helped fund that award too. Because I know that we were kind of putting funds towards that as well, which is nice because the Toronto Real Asian is a great festival. They're very supportive, and it was nice that they finally had an animation award. So I feel honored to have won the very first animation award that you had helped sponsor and create. And that's sort of like a true testament, I think, to not just like our relationship in terms of how you've helped me out over the years, but sort of indirectly you've helped other filmmakers as well. And through things like these awards and such. So like I said, when I look back at that period when we first sort of met, that meant a lot. And I still to this day feel really honored that you would take the time to help me out. And honestly, what was cool is that after I made that What Are You Anyways film, you basically gifted it back to me and said, here's the rights, take it, do whatever you want. We don't want it under the company name. And so that sparked something in me about the generosity of not just you, but a lot of filmmakers, especially animation filmmakers in general, knowing that, it's important to have control of our work. right? And I think you're someone who is a true testament to having control over your work to some extent. You know, obviously you produce with the NFB, but as far as an independent goes, you have a lot of a catalog of great films that you've created that you own and you have the rights to. So before we get kind of too far into kind of talking about, you know, the future and everything else, let's take a little bit of a look back at the past. So let's talk about a bit about, I'm going to maybe take it back to that Global Mechanic time, because that was a neat period in my life to kind of be able to come into the studio, meet you, see how a studio was operating. And you guys were doing some really cool stuff back then with commercials and even with Long Tack Sam as well. But I know your career extends way further back to that, but what was sort of the genesis of starting up your own studio in that sense? I know you had partners and such that you were working with, but was it sort of just the right time in your career to start Global Mechanic?
Oh my goodness, no. I mean, this is completely personal. I was, you know, I've been making films since oh, sorry, my light just went. I've been making films since the 80s, right?
Right.
And I was married to Bruce Alcock at the time, and he was working in commercials, and really wanted to come back to Canada. We were in Chicago, and I said, you know, if you come up, I'll manage the company. You know, we'll start a company together. I'll manage the company for X amount of time. And so that's what happened. And I think that, you know, Global Mechanic was fantastic for both of us, really. We were able to, you know, I was able to come back to the place where I grew up and sort of round up all my old animation posse and introduce the company to, you know, to the very changing landscape that was animation in Vancouver. This is like 2000, right? So, and for me, because I, you know, I'd never had a lot of means to make my films are pretty flinty. Having a production company where we actually had, you know, employees and equipment, infrastructure, it was incredible. It was a real privilege that time. So I think it really helped me personally up my game in terms of my expectations of, you know, screen value and all those kinds of things, right? So I learned a lot from the commercial process for sure. And you know, you can see I'm, you know, for the long time since since I've, you know, been gone from Global Mechanic, I'm pretty much a one-person show again, and then I gear up depending on the you know, the status of the projects that I'm working on. You know, I'm trying to work still on, you know, a major feature film coming to you, plus these, you know, these almost no budget films that I do for the, you know, in the community and by myself.
Mm-hmm. And we'll definitely want to get into that. And I think, again, I want to take it even further back now. I want to talk about little Marie Fleming here, AMF. And let's look at, like, where were you, because you've got, this is kind of cool, like, where were you born? You've got kind of a history of sort of traveling and living in a lot of different places, but where were you born? Where'd you grow up? And how did the animation that you were watching in these places, maybe it influenced you a little bit as you got older?
私は沖縄生まれJeff.
Hi.
That's my only Japanese phrase. I was born in Okinawa. My dad is from Australia and my mom is Hong Kong Chinese. Not all Hong Kong Chinese, of course. I think in the background here, you can see my great-grandfather, Long Tack Sam, who was her grandfather. I was only there for a few months of my life, and then we went to Australia for a little bit, and then we went to Hong Kong for a few years, and that's where my brother was born. And then we came to Vancouver. I lived here for many, many, many years, and then I went to the Canadian Film Centre in Toronto, and then I went from there to an artist residency in Germany. I lived in Germany for a few years, and then I went to Chicago for a few years, and then I came back. I've been back here for over 20 years. I can't believe it. Wow. I can't believe it. But my background, you know, I think I come from an artistic family. I didn't understand how artistic till I made The Magical Life of Long Tag Sam, because, you know, I, I, I pretty much had a STEM education, right? I thought I was going to be a doctor. I was in pre-med, and but that didn't work out so well, and now I'm in film. Also, you know, like around a lot of languages, around a lot of culture, around a lot of music. You know, I was classically trained as as a flute player, and I play a lot of little things, and I have a lot of interests. You know, so I do have a science background. I have I ended up getting a honors English degree, you know, from UBC, and then interdisciplinary from SFU, and animation from Emily Carr. So I have a lot of interests, and what I think is so fantastic about film in general and animation in particular is that I can do these deep dives into my constantly expanding world of interest, you know, and play. I mean, that's the thing. As you go on, it's harder and harder, because more of it becomes about how do I survive, and how do I keep playing, and how do I raise the money for this very expensive, you know, playground that I prefer to, you know, to live in. So that's why, yeah, I guess, you know, I'm old now. I'm old. It's like I'm old, but I still
Oh,
feel,
yeah.
just as excited about stuff. And when I say old, I just mean I've done a lot of films, and so I know how hard it is to make them. I think at the very beginning, you don't know, so you're not discouraged, and you don't talk yourself out of things. You just go ahead blindly, right? So now it's like, how do you still go ahead like that when you've got all your eyes open?
Right. I definitely want to talk about that huge catalog of work that you have created, that very eclectic, you know, catalog of work too, that we were talking about before. But I guess taking it back to the Emily Carr time, I don't know a lot about sort of that time, but I've heard stories, you know, of how you came about to be an animator, and there was a car accident involved, I've heard.
Yeah.
Do you want to, like, is that the story you like to tell, like how you kind of stumbled upon this idea
Oh,
of creating animated films
sure,
and such?
sure. So, you know, my grandfather, who was a radiologist, was also an amateur photographer in Hong Kong. Like, not really good. I mean, amateur in that he didn't get paid. Like,
Hmm.
an excellent photographer, a great printer. He always had the latest gadget, you know. So I had a video portapack, you know, when I was a kid, just doing things, you know, making variety shows, just playing around. But when you know, I was sort of introduced to film culture at UBC, and the hierarchy didn't really suit me. You know, I thought, I'd like to tell stories. I love film, but I just don't think this is my world. And then after I graduated, I went to university, and no, I wasn't. After I went to Europe, I was in university. I went to Europe, and I was having these really weird things happen to me. The strange dreams. And I had kind of this obsession about twins. I was gathering all these images about twins. And also in the middle of the night, Hampstead Heath, a seagull fell on my head. And this sounds random, but when I came back, and also a bunch of stuff happened to me.
Right.
So when I came back to Vancouver, I saw A Z in 2 Knots by Peter Greenaway, and where a swan falls on this car and kills pregnant twins. And then there were also these images in the film that were exactly the images in my dreams, like awful images. And I thought, oh my God, I really want to make films. I need to be able to express myself like that. This is so exciting. And I happened to go to the Pacific Cinematheque, and I saw a bunch of shorts. I saw Martin Rose's short study of an apartment, and which was cutout paper animation. And I'd never really seen anything like that before. And I found out he went to Emily Carr, and that they were, you know, taking people. All I had to do was get together a portfolio. And I'd I've been traveling all across Europe and thanking people by painting their portrait on t-shirts. so
Oh,
my yeah, so and then I started painting umbrellas for a living, and I was like, you know, I did have a portfolio, but it was, you know, it was just kind of funky. I think I got in on my writing. There were only 10 people that they accepted, and they were really they were trying to get women to get into animation because there were like none. So that's how that happened. And after about a year, no less than a year, I was taken in by my teacher, Hugh Folds, who I can say anything about now because he's no longer with us. And Hugh tried to convince me to quit. He said I was taking up a space that somebody else would love to have. I had no talent, and maybe I should become an accountant because maybe I'd be better at that. And I thought, wow, no, 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 no. I've worked so hard to be here. I'm staying, right? And then I made this film Waiting, which was about it's about my death of my grandmother at the end of that year. And it won all of these awards. And Hugh said I could stay there because you can stay here. You don't have to, because that film was not technically animated. He goes, you can have your desk. The big difference between film and animation was that animators got their own desk, which was very exciting at art school. So he said, you can sit at this desk as long as you want. You don't even have to animate. And then I got hit and run over by 2 cars, right?
oh my
And I couldn't walk, and I had no strength. And everybody said, drop out of school again. You should drop out of school, you know, go to a beach in Mexico, like recover, or you'll never walk again. And I had just, you know, I'd given up such a lot to go back to school. I was not going to quit. And so I started drawing Stick Girl. It's my first film so far. So it's about the story of my life in 80 seconds. But so she represents, that little girl represents all the strength I had at the time. Right. And I really do think that you can see an artist's personality in the simplest lines and the simplest gesture and the simplest movements. Right. So that's where Stick Girl started. And we've had, you know, we've made tons of films together. We've had an iPhone app, we've done webisodes, you know, she started off with just pencil and paper. And, you know, more recently, 2016, I made Window Horses, which is a feature-length animated film where Stick Girl actually has a name. Her name is Rosie Ming, and she actually has a voice, and her voice was performed by Sandra Oh. So she's had kind of a crazy time.
Yeah, well, that's a crazy story. You know what I mean? Like, you know, Hugh Folds, obviously, I think, was he the one who started the Emily Carr program back in the day? Was it him?
He was very influential.
Yeah.
I'm not actually sure if he started the animation program, but he was, it doesn't sound like it, but he was really a mentor to a lot of people, and he was very encouraging often. And he also knew, and I think some of my best teachers are like this, like they knew what they didn't know. So he brought in just a whole lineup of guest artists who would come in. They were totally inspiring. That was the best thing about art school, I would say, is getting to hear the process of other artists.
Mm-hmm. And that's great. You know what I mean? I think that really is sort of where a lot of that sort of risk-taking comes into play. And like you said, Stick Girl came out of that period, I guess, right? So,
well, it's interesting. If you look at Stick Girl too, right? Like there was one hand, it is an ode to Hugh in some ways, because we had a hand drawing class, and he said, you know, it's really difficult to draw hands, you know, you should just do, you know, three clumps, right, at the beginning, so you don't have to worry about the fingers. And I used to say, no, not the paw. And in fact, Stick Girl has paws, and that's kind of in joke to Hugh Folds.
wow, look at this. I'm feeling like I'm getting all this sort of insider info now. You're letting out all the secrets. But would I look at your body of work, it's expansive, and then you go on IMDb and it looks like you've directed 29 films, but I'm pretty sure it's more than that. Live action, documentary, animation. But do you actually know how many films that you've actually made in
No.
regards to how many short, how many feature?
Well, the features are easier to count because they take longer to make. I think I've made five feature-length films, so over 80 minutes. And I've made a couple of short features, like over 45 minutes. And I've made so many little films, so many from like 80 seconds to 15 minutes.
Wow. So they probably on various formats from 16
Oh my God.
everything.
That's the hardest. Keeping your archive up to date, that's the hardest. Yeah. I've made too much work. I think that's clear.
Well, at some point they'll have like, a 2-day retrospective of your work and they'll just play everything back to back, right?
Well, they did that about 15 years ago. Like there's
They played everything?
well, not everything. I mean, 15 years ago, a lot has happened in the last 15 years.
Yeah. So I guess in essence, when you think of yourself as a filmmaker, obviously we've talked a lot about, just the fact that you just create, right? And whatever speaks to you, in terms of like, how do you sort of come to decide it's like, okay, now I'm going to make this feature live action narrative, or I'm going to make a feature animated film or a feature documentary. What sort of sparks the drive at the time? Is it just, what's the creative juices that are flowing? I'm curious what kind of like gets you moving in a certain direction, I guess. Like, is it just you feel like you wake up one day, I'm going to make an animated film, or is there a process, a method to the madness, I guess?
Yeah, I think it's always different. I mean, you're an artist and you work in more than one medium, and like some ideas are short films, some are longer, some are animated, some are documentaries, some are books, some are just conversations, some's just a meal, right? So it's always different. And of course, the longer the film and an animation period, it's a huge commitment, right? And so those ideas really have to stick with you. And sometimes I could say, I don't know why, I'm really just compelled. And other times, there's things that I really, really, really want to say. And even the stuff where I'm not clear, it's just, it won't leave me, this idea won't leave me. As I work on it more and more, I see all the layers of why it was so important that I try and tell this story.
Right. And I guess we look at like where we live, the location of where we live. I'm from Kelowna, small town sort of thing, moved to Vancouver, but I've lived here a good chunk of my life now. And obviously yourself, you've kind of bounced back and forth, but you've landed back in Vancouver. And like you said, you've been here for 20 years. What is it sort of about Vancouver, and how do you feel like it's sort of shaped your filmmaking? Obviously where we are, where we're based has some effect, and I've seen it in your films as well, like kind of this sort of this West Coasty sort of these stories like Big Tree and stuff. But really, what is it about Vancouver that just really kind of like, I guess, inspires your work to some extent, or does it? I don't know.
Well, this is a weird story too, is that when I became a Canadian citizen, I was under the age of majority, under the age of consent, right? So my parents became Canadian, and that was a time when you could not have dual citizenship. So my brother lives in Australia, my parents live in England. They all have dual, triple citizenships. I only have Canadian.
Oh, wow.
I'm like probably like the only person who's not a refugee who only has a citizenship of a place that they were not born, right? So that's interesting. When also Vancouver, I came from Hong Kong. I left when I was very young, but I remember that landscape so much, with the mountains that go into the sea, and you have this, city right on the edge. There's not too many places like that. And I don't know, it's like, it's very emotional when I fly into Hong Kong, which I rarely do, or I fly into Vancouver. I get emotional thinking that this is home. It's really about the landscape, even though I don't make a lot of films about landscape, but I think of everything as landscape, And when I went to Germany, I mean, I was living in Toronto for a few years when I went to Germany, and I always thought of myself as sort of this cosmopolitan person of no, I never really thought of myself as Canadian. It was very important for my parents who left, right, that they didn't really bond with the whole North American sensibility and culture. In fact, I'll just say this, it doesn't matter and who cares, but like I used to have a British, sort of Hong Kong British accent till I was about 14. And I was teased so relentlessly for it that I dropped it, right? So now I have this. I don't even know what this is, but it's something that I created, and it's something that I can't quite take off, but it's something that doesn't feel completely like me, and I think it's so interesting because, just it's different. Maybe it's a little different from you, being mixed race because you were born in Canada, right? But I came from somewhere else, and I'm an outsider in my own family, right? In some ways, because I was really brought up in more of a Chinese culture, and I was definitely an outsider when I came here, right? And now mixed race is way more common, right? But it wasn't so much then. So anyway, blah, 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 your question. So I'm in Germany, and I realized, talking to people from all over the world, because it's an international artist colony, right, is that my sensibility is so Canadian, it's so West Coast, and it's so Vancouver. I couldn't believe it. I went, oh my God, I'm a Vancouver person, right? Like I may have a larger context and a wider outlook than somebody who's only just lived in Vancouver. But yeah, and so Rosie Ming, it's interesting because we're so privileged to live here, right? And we're so blind. We're behind everything. It's just like there's an openness, but also there's a blinkerness, right? And so when I made Window Horses, and the character Rosie Ming, who I make as my avatar, Stick Girl is her, but she's half Chinese and she's half Iranian, and she's all Canadian, right? Is that she's just clueless about some things. Like she's just, she lives in this little part of the world where she's been protected from a lot of stuff, and not all bad stuff, but just where you really need to have the interest, you really need to make an effort to know what's going on here. You have to make an effort. It's so easy to ignore what's going on in the rest of the world.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
yeah.
Wow, and that's an interesting perspective. And I don't think I ever clued in that you had an accent prior, and this is sort of something you developed over time. I've always just thought,
I have kind of a formal way of speaking, and every once in a while I say a word that sounds kind of weird, right?
does it ever come out like when you drink or anything? Like, does that accent ever creep in or anything?
No. It's like a
so
little,
buried,
you say tomato, I say tomato, right?
Right.
But when I hear myself saying something British, I kind of squeeze it because it sounds weird, and then it just comes out like I said. And certainly when I got on a plane, I get that mid-Atlantic accent, right? And when I was in Germany, if I'm speaking to other people in other languages, apparently I sound Scottish or something. I don't know.
Really? Wow.
It's just weird.
Adapt. Interesting.
It's just weird. Yeah.
And that's neat. Like I like Vancouver. I love Vancouver. I love the animation scene in Vancouver. There's a lot of amazing independent animators that live here. It's got a storied history going back to Al Sens and Marv Newland and International Rocket Ship and all those kind of, back then. And how do you feel? I guess in terms of is that also what attracts you to Vancouver, is that there is a vibrant kind of animation scene here? Or do you actually are you just so recluse in your little studio that you don't really ever kind of venture out? Or does that ever kind of impact you a little bit too? In terms of saying, yeah, you got friends in the industry here, or you just sort of stick to yourself? I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I got my first animation gig just before lockdown. Right, just before COVID, it was like, oh, somebody in the industry is gonna hire me, because it hasn't really affected me. I know a lot of animators, but from my generation mainly, right? So yeah, because I don't really work in the industry, it's weird, and so that's not what draws me here. I mean, for sure, there's great resources if you wanted to crew up. Well, and not also because there's so many companies here. Everybody's really busy, right? like, it's amazing. I mean, how many hundreds, maybe thousands of people work in animation now in Vancouver? Thousands of people. And they're busy.
Yeah, well, it's definitely, you've seen that over your years here as well too, like how it has grown, right?
Oh, I think part of the reason I make my own films, right, is because there was no industry when I graduated, right? There was zero. So if you wanted to work, if you, so I just made my own stuff.
Right. But I guess you must have crossed paths with, the Marv Newlands and the.
Oh, absolutely. I knew Marvin. I knew Alan. In fact, when I made a documentary when I was at Emily Carr with them, and like Marv and Al and Danny, he had just finished Lupo the Butcher. I've got it on, 3/4 inch somewhere in my.
Oh, really? I want to see that.
Yeah. I know. It'd be amazing, right?
Do you have, like, is it digitalized or anything, or like, how do you watch it?
Well, I don't know how it is after our heat dome wave
Oh,
from
no.
last one. Yeah, it got pretty hot up there. But
Well,
no, it's in 3/4. I haven't been able to transfer it. Like, it is a piece of history. It is a piece of history. And it's so interesting because Marv refused to be interviewed, which is why, but he gave me Danny, because Danny was working with him at the time. And Danny really wanted to be interviewed. And Al Sens, I went all through his studio, but Al didn't want to be on camera. So I just panned the walls with all of Al's artwork.
really? Wow. Yeah, we
Yeah.
gotta find a way to digitize that. That's a national, a Vancouver treasure right there. But it's funny how, like, they didn't want to be on camera, which I think is a testament to the shy animator, I guess, right?
Well, Marv and Al Sens helped everybody. They helped so many people in the industry. They were so generous, and so yeah, I really, I really admire them, and I think that, I think a lot of animators, you just give back. You know how hard it is, and you just, want to help.
And I think that maybe is it even like how we met, I think you really helped me, right? And I appreciate that. And it's neat to see that, that has had a progression, over time as well too. People helping you helping others. Now I'm helping, people.
Well,
And it's sort of,
Al and Marv didn't actually help me. But
okay. Well, they let you
they
interview.
helped a lot of people.
Well, okay. They still let you tour the studio. But I guess in terms of like your own studio, you operate under Sleepy Dog Films. That's kind of a fun name. I got Meditating Bunny. Is mine. What's the sort of inspiration behind the name of the like your studio, I guess?
Oh, I made this little book, a little children's book, when I was an animation student, about Ralph, a very sleepy dog, and that Ralph would, he loves to do a lot of things, but mainly he just wants to sleep, and it's sort of all about sleep deprivation, right? And that was a little bit, that was a little autobiographical. And so you, as a father of young children, know how important sleep can be.
Oh, I know that all too well, Anne Marie.
Yeah. And I think also, I made a film, You Take Care Now, also, which starts off with all these sleep quotes, like sleep that knits the raveled sleeve of care. You lack the nature, the sweetness of all nature, sleep, right? That Shakespeare is that, because I've also had a lot of accidents and I've had a lot of pain, right? And there's nothing like pain, chronic pain, to stop you from sleeping. So, and also sleep is where, sleep is supposed to be restorative, but it's also where all your ideas come from. It's so funny, the whole dog thing, because, my last film that I made was called Old Dog. And I did it because of another Marie Fleming, who has a company called Old Dog. They make technologies for aging canines, and we're always getting mixed up. And I decided to reach out to her and ask her if I could make a film inspired by her work, and working, trying to bring joy to dogs and to their owners, as a way of talking about the friendliness of aging and our, disintegrating bodies. I don't have a dog. I did have a dog, but I don't have a dog. But I am a dog.
Well, that's what I mean. It's a fun name for a studio to operate under, Sleepy Dog Films. I guess moving on to this idea that I was asked to sort of ask you, as they called you, an auteur, an animation auteur.
Right.
I don't know. Do you like being called an animation auteur? I guess.
Well, nobody's called me that.
Oh, well,
And
that's what they said. Let's talk to Anne Marie Fleming about being an animation auteur. So maybe it's the idea of like having you make films that are very unmistakably you,
yeah,
right? When we watch an Anne Marie Fleming film, a lot of times I can be like, yeah, that's an Anne Marie Fleming film. Whether it's the storytelling, whether it's the sort of art techniques, especially if it's something hand drawn by you, because your style is you. And I guess looking at that sort of style and how that's developed over time, because it's rough, it's sketchy, it's quick. Do you work straight ahead? Like, what's the process usually in
yeah.
your brain?
If I am animating, it's through animation, right? I love that. But, often for very, very many years now, I work with other animators. And primarily, I've been working with Kevin Langdale, who also is an Emily Carr grad.
Mhm.
Uh,
He was a year ahead of me. I
yeah,
remember him well.
he is so crazy talented. I mean, often I will do the design work and, I'll storyboard it and he'll make it better, right? But he'll still keep with my design. But like in Window Horses too, he did it, that was like, that was so much, that was Kevin, right? Except for my little stick girl. We went back and forth with design ideas, but it's interesting because I think that auteur filmmaking, you could say that I am one, but for auteur animation, people assume that you're also doing all the animation, right? And I don't, because I am a very, very mediocre illustrator. I just am, and I don't know all the bells and whistles. And there's so many incredible people that that I get to work with, and it's just really exciting seeing your ideas being expressed through other people's imaginations. So,
Yeah,
so
and
I, yeah, so sorry, just so I feel weird about saying I'm auteur. It's, I'm independent, right? I do a lot of personal work. Um, I'm fiercely independent, but yeah, am I an auteur? I mean, like it seems I feel uncomfortable with that term.
well, it's interesting too, because like I said, I knowing your body of work and seeing many of your films over the years, and knowing that sometimes you'll do the animation, sometimes it'll be Kevin, sometimes it'll be a lot of other great animators that we both know. It's neat because I think there is this perception that as independent animators, if people want to call us that, people expect us to be the ones sitting there for days on end drawing our own stuff. Which isn't always the case. I've done projects too where I've had animators work with me, which is nice, but at the same time, you're still directing. So I guess that's sort of the sort of that process too, is that we can't always assume that the independent animator is always the one who's working the mark making material, right? So, but moving on to also you've done a great amount of work working with the National Film Board, which is something I've never done. Maybe it's just because I've got certain, I'm just not my thing, but you've done quite a bit. Like, I was a child of a Holocaust survivor, Old Dog. Sometimes you'll co-produce, like with Window Horses and such. What's the relationship, and how is that? If for other filmmakers out there wanting to work with the National Film Board, do you have advice? Do you say stay clear? I don't want you to burn bridges, but what are some things to think about as you because that's always a lot of filmmakers are like, hey, I want to do NFB films because I watched all these great NFB films when I was a kid.
Absolutely. And internationally, they're like an icon. And yeah, of course, there's a lot of things that, I could complain about, but I'm not going to. I'm going to say, if you want to work with the NFB, it's really great, especially if you're an emerging filmmaker, because they will team you up with a good team. They will produce you, right? Like my first, it's so funny because I never think of myself as having, a relationship with the film board. And I go, oh my goodness, you have made so many films with the film board. but it started off with 5 feminist minutes, which was part of this this snapshots by women, 15 women across the country, you know, over 20 years ago, to celebrate Studio D, Women's Studio. And they just gave us some money and some rolls of film. And they said, go away, right? Go away, do what you do. And so I thought, oh, this is fantastic. It was a little bit of money and it was a little bit of film. But, you know, with The Magical Life of Long Tag Sam, they asked me if I had an idea. You know, you've got stages, you've got to investigate, then you have development, and then will it go into production? This can be a really, really long process, right? This could be years, and they may, you know, drop you off at any point. But if you're doing something small, right, like that's fun. It can be really fun. They're super supportive. I mean, it depends also if you want control over your own work, copyright, right? They will take the amount of copyright that they put equity in, right? And like they are producers, they are not funders. And so I've been commissioned by them to do work like I was a child of Holocaust survivors. They approached me about doing that. And that was very long process and very difficult. You know, dealing with somebody else's autobiography, which is all about, you know, the Holocaust and doing it as a first person, right? And oh, it's my film. It's, you know, it's so interesting, sort of the cultural waves that I had to surf there. Bernice Eisenstein wrote the book, right? And I adapted her book, and she was the person who read the words. You know, Window Horses too, they came in and because they were, you know, Shirley Recrusi, she came in and said, you know, can we help you? Because she saw that I was doing this Indiegogo campaign with Sandra and blah, blah, blah. But I had approached them for years before that. And it was, no, we don't do feature animation, right? Like it was no, until it was yes. And that's something that you can say about anybody, right? About anything that you do in life. No, until it's yes. So if you don't mind not having copyright, right? Then that is they're a good possibility. And as far as distribution goes, you know, like you know, I would say the best thing about the film board is that you will be part of their archive. And that is, I think that has a lot of value, because a lot of people learn about Canada or through the film board. And, you know, now it's a completely different landscape, but a lot of people learned about animation, certainly independent animation, certainly auteur animation, through the film board, because the animation department there is this beautiful little oasis, you know. Right. There aren't any studios like that around the world anymore that are government supported. So I think it's pretty special. It has its, you know, it has its drawbacks, as all institutions do, but I found a group of incredibly dedicated people who really care about film and filmmakers there.
That's great. Yeah, and I think that's the thing is, you know, amazing animators have passed through the doors at the NFB, right? You know, Cordell Barker, you know, Nora McLaren, you know, like there's the list goes on and on and on, right? Richard Conde. And it's cool to say, you know, you are one of those filmmakers that the NFB has made films with, you. But I guess shifting it a little bit, I do want to talk about Window Horses, because, you know, that was a big project and a very important project for you that definitely toured the world and was seen by millions, I don't know how many, many people, millions of people. But also thinking it, like, I was really kind of blown away, because I self-identify as a mixed Japanese person, mixed Japanese Canadian, you know, and here we have a mixed, you know, protagonist in the filming. We've talked about Rosie Ming, and then you got Sandra Oh to come on board, and she voiced the character. And Sandra Oh is a big advocate for Asian representation in media, yourself as well, through the films you've created. I guess talking about the importance of diversity in film, can you expand on that, and why is that important? How is that important? And because you were probably, you know, this was probably important to you way before it became, you know, this golden ticket thing that took off, you know, with Crazy Rich Asians, right? And this sort of how it's really exploded recently. But
And a golden ticket.
you remember that whole golden ticket campaign? We gotta support ourselves here, but
Yeah,
also knowing too, like that's, you know, I guess going back to Window Horses again, you know, how was it, like, how does someone get Sandra Oh on board, which is kind of crazy and cool, because her career is skyrocketed, obviously, and getting her to like come on board and really support this film in the way that you guys both did, making the film. What's, I guess, and knowing that you're both champions for Asian representation.
Well, I've known Sandra for a long time. We were supposed to make a film together back in '94, and that didn't work out. And I went to Germany, and she went and became really famous in America. And but we've kept in touch. And you know, she had 10 years on Grey's Anatomy, so she's always busy. And I just I contacted her and I said, you know, I just need 2 hours of your time. How would you feel about, you know, voicing my character, right? And she said, oh, no problem. And I said, no, you have to. I was surprised.
Wow.
I went, no. And I said, no, but you should really read the graphic novel that you need to read it, because it's quite a particular story, you know, and it's you should read it. And so she did, and she was very, very moved, and she really wanted to come on and not just be the voice of the character, but be the voice of the film. And we did do an Indiegogo campaign, and we were able to talk, well, Sandra was able to talk on behalf of herself, of me, of the film, about all the things that we care about, you know, diversity, girl power, art, culture, tolerance, peace. Like, we got so much press on a film that wasn't even made, because everybody wanted to know what Sandra was doing, because she just finished 10 years of Grey's Anatomy, which I didn't know. I didn't know that it was like this perfect little sweet spot where she could say yes to things, because her time was not prescribed. I don't know when it was magic, and it was such a privilege to work with her. And what did she do? She got all of these great actors to come on to the film, because they all have such respect for her, right? So oh my God, I just say thank you, Sandra Oh. So, and also just generally, she is a huge supporter of Canadian independent films. Like, she's amazing. Like, that person that you hear talking, you know, that's her, right? She's super, super authentic. She really cares about these things. And her nieces are, they're mixed too, right? And she wants them to see themselves. And that's it. Like, we all want to see ourselves. I think that whoever you are, well, no, maybe that's not true, but most people, why I did, like, I got into film because I wanted to acknowledge some things. I wanted to acknowledge my point of view, right? I wanted the soapbox. I wanted the conch. I wanted to be able to say things, to not be interrupted, because this is my film, right? It's my film. It's my voice. It's my story. And I love watching other people's stories too, right? It's like, yeah, I exist, and maybe I'm a little different than you are, but maybe we share a lot in common.
Yeah, and it's like I said, it's something too where I look at the body of work I've done. There's a lot of mixed race representation in the work I do, because I feel like that's important to me and my kids, and them seeing themselves reflected in film. I always kind of wonder, like, why do we have this necessity to have to see ourselves represented in film? And is it sort of like an egotistical thing? Is it, you know, what is it that really pushes us and drives us to do that? And realizing that it's just, we have to tell our stories, right?
But that's what we do. We're human. We tell our stories. And ego, I mean, it is a huge act of ego to make art, right? And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that in it's all about a sense of self, and a personal sense of self, and a collective sense of self, right? It's like how we stand up. It's how we get up in the morning, right? It's like, so I don't think ego is a bad word. You know, humble, but it's like, a humble egotist. Yes.
Right. And like I said, I met you around the time when you were making Magical Life of Long Tack Sam. I was learning about your family history, knowing your roots, your Chinese roots, and also, knowing that who would have known down the road I would make a feature documentary about my family, that incorporated a lot of animation. But to be straight up, your film was a huge influence on my film. I really appreciate that, that you had that influence on my work as well. And I think that's a true.
Oh, well, I mean, that is really nice of you to say. And I'm not surprised. And I'm not surprised because, it's because Long Tack Sam opened a lot of doors. It's like, oh, you can do that, right? It's like, oh, you can do that. That's a way of storytelling. I can understand. I can, and I think I've done a lot of stuff on my family, a lot of my earlier works, more experimental short works, but also some feature stuff. And yeah, I think that's what my stuff does. It's not just what I'm saying, it's how I'm saying it. It gives people an entry. Oh, I can talk about myself like any way, right? There isn't a way, there's so many ways. And the means of production too, is that I don't have to wait till it's here. I can just speak, right? And I think that my early work gets shown in a lot of media studies, women's studies, blah, 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 universities, colleges and stuff like that. And I think that the first person voice even, like at some point somebody made a joke that there's a little Marie Fleming school of short filmmaking, but it's because it's not confessional, right? It's not confessional, but what it is is extremely brave. And I talk about it in the third person. That's why I have my little stick girl too, is that I don't know how she does that stuff. Like, how does she say those things? And how does she make those choices? It's like sometimes I look at my old work and my heart stops. I go, how could I have done that? Right? Like, who was that person? And it was me, right?
Right.
Like we forget that. We forget what we're capable of doing, right? And this is before the world of the internet and social media and everybody. Like I'm an introvert, right? Like I would never go on social media and say anything personal. I just would never do that. And so it seems weird. Like I used to do stand-up. I did stand-up when I was in my early 20s briefly. And it's the same thing. Like, like the people I surrounded with, guys, they were just the shyest people, but something made them go up there. I mean, what I learned from stand-up was the reason you get on stage is because you want to get out there more than you don't want to get out there, because you don't want to go on stage a lot, but you want to go on stage this much more. Right. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's a really great perspective because, when you think about all of that, I didn't know you could stand up, Amory. That kind of like hit me there. I was like, wow, okay. I've always thought about doing it, but I agree with, I'm like you, I'm an introverted person who's kind of an introverted extrovert only because of the profession we're in and that we do all this public speaking. We have to kind of put ourselves there, but I'm sure like you, it drains your energy like that, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'll be taking a bath after this.
Yeah, but it's at the same time too, I'm learning a lot about, your perspective and how you approach making films. And, I want to, again, I feel like I'm just throwing kudos at you the whole time, but you really taught,
just keep them coming.
Okay, I'm going to keep it going then. You really taught me that you can make films any damn way you want to make a film.
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah.
And there doesn't have to be a rule. If you want to do a first person narrative and talking, to the camera, whatever, do it. And that really did give me that perspective that, hey, I can do that. You know what I mean?
It gave you confidence.
It did. So I thank you. That really helped that film. And I don't know, when you look back, I don't know, I'm sure that you're the same way, maybe I am, but watch a film like that, What Are You Anyways, film that you helped me out with. And, I'm like, well, it's not the best film. It was cool at the time, but at the same time, that's me as a 23-year-old trying to tell a story about something. You must be in the same boat, right? It's just, that was me when I was this age, or my perspective. And do you ever regret anything, I guess, that you've made?
I love it all. Like I see the awards and everything, but it's interesting. And I know who made it, right? Like I know exactly the person who made each of those things. It's yeah, sure, they're time capsules, but I come back to the same themes. And you know, for good or bad, I often think about things the same way. For window horses, though, I just want to say that my way of storytelling there, which is like sort of transgenerational, I think I had to come to this stage of my life before I could be so 360 about my point of view, right? Like that's definitely not what was missing. I just didn't explore, really didn't explore that in some of my younger work.
Right. And for someone who has a huge body of work, you've traveled the world with it. You've gone to many great places. You've been to tons of film festivals. Is there a kind of experience that you've had? I'm sure it's hard to pinpoint one, but is there like an award you've won, anything, a festival you've gotten into that just was sort of just solidified the fact that awesome, you know, this is why I make film? Because I love festivals. They're a fun place to hang out and meet people. And you know, I remember when I was actually in a production meeting at Global, and I was showing the boards or something. You came in, plopped an award down from the San Diego Asian, was like, plopped down a video camera and stuff. Look what I won. And I was like, oh, you can win stuff at festivals? And I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And that actually, I became a festival junkie after that. Like I was like entering all these festivals, and you know, and I've won my fair share of awards as well too. And it's kind of fun, you know, to be like, you know, look what we're doing. But is there something that stands out to you over this illustrious career you've had that just, I don't know, stands out?
Oh, it's weird because I mean, like awards are nice. It's always nice to have, you know, appreciation from your peers, or even better from people who are not your peers, right? But that they're ultimately not that meaningful, right? It's great to be able to have a profile for your film because maybe that will help more people see the film. Maybe it'll help you get funding to make another film, right? Like they're very much process. But I think that when I made The Magical Life of Long-Tai Sam, an editor from Riverhead Books contacted me and said that she was a white woman, but she was married to, no, she wasn't married, she was engaged to an Asian person, and their mother taught in inner city schools in New York, in New York City. And she saw it on PBS and she thought this would make such a great graphic novel, such a great way to teach high school kids, immigrant kids, to value their own stories, because a lot of immigrants don't talk about where they came from, especially if it's hard stories, right? And my family never talked about it.
Sure.
And so, so it was such a privilege. It was like, because first I always wanted to be a comic artist. That was like my number one thing besides, you know, being a doctor. And so this was kind of like a dream come true. And when the book came out, it's not like it was a, you know, huge bestseller, but it got on the American Library Association's top 10 list for teens. And for me, that was so meaningful. I thought, oh, I have done something that is contributing to a conversation in like I am doing something positive, right? I'm doing something absolutely positive out in the world. And now I can die. I don't have to do anything ever again. Well, that lasted like 5 minutes, right? But I remember feeling that that I had done what I'd wanted to do. I'd made craft. I'd done something practical, right? Like it seems like I'm just talking about my own stories. And it's just like when you talked about ego, is that I never wanted to just do that. I wanted to make something that would be meaningful to someone else's life, right? And so when you talked about, you know, that my filmmaking gave you confidence, and other people have said that to me too. And it's just like the best. It's absolutely the best to know that you open the world up just a little bit for someone else. Like that's the best.
Well, that's awesome. I would love to leave it there, but I still have a couple more questions. And actually, no, it's funny. I was looking up because I actually saw that I have a copy. I keep it just above me where I work because, you know, it's always nice to pull open. But for those who haven't checked it out, I don't know if it's still in print, but you might be able to find it. But here's what you wrote. In the February of 2008, it says, Jeff, history is relatives. As you well know, please enjoy this trip through the, what does that say?
My handwriting's always been poor.
Through the what?
I wanted to be a doctor, remember? As you
Please
know,
enjoy this trip through the,
please enjoy this through, this trip through the 20th century.
oh, 20th century. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, there we go. AMF. And that's what I mean. I think what I really love about your career is that you just make what you want to make. You know, if it's a graphic novel, if it's a film, if it's food, you know, it's you know, I've eaten your food, and you know, it's fun.
I'm a great cook. Oh yeah, because we did that little refugee kitchen project.
You did. And so I feel like, you know, I've gotten to experience a lot of the work that you have done. But speaking of work, where are we at? I know that we've had to reschedule this once because you were super busy in post. Can you talk about new projects or anything up your sleeve at the moment?
Well, I've been working for many, 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 many years on Shanghai Follies, which is a fictional account based on my the research that I did for The Magical Life of Long Tak Sam, which takes place in 1932 in Vancouver, which is like the death of vaudeville. Movies are killing vaudeville. You know, it's the middle of the Depression. Fascism is on the rise. Chinese people can't move anywhere. Mixed race people are practically illegal. And here's my family, and here's my grandmother trapped in a family circus that she would really like to leave. So that's my big project. And then I've also got a live action but animated project called Can I Get a Witness, which is about how we can save the world from exploding. Basically, we can stop climate change. We can stop climate change,
Right.
poverty, and have true species equality if we just turn back technology a little bit and die by 50. And but the thing that I've been so busy on is, and I have been animating it myself, is the Standing Wave Ensemble. They're a new music ensemble in Vancouver, and they commissioned a composition by Vivian Fung, and they commissioned me to do a little film which will be accompany their live performance. And so it's been taking a long time, so I'm struggling to finish it right now. And actually Bill Morrison, who he's a guitar player from Skinny Puppy, but he also he's a director himself, but an incredible After Effects guru, and he's finishing this up. He's editing it for me as.
Oh, really? Wow.
But yes, I had a lot to learn. That's why I have this antique behind me. I was doing my dots and dashes. So.
Right, just like your signature, dots and dashes.
Do my dots and dashes. That's right.
So final question then. If you have to leave this chat we've had with any words of advice to either budding filmmakers, animators, or just any general parting words that you may have that you would like to end this with, what would that be, Anne-Marie Fleming?
Oh, geez. Okay, so we're still in COVID, right? We're still in COVID.
It still feels like we're in COVID. If anything, it feels like we're getting worse. Yeah, but anyway,
it's not the best of times, right? I mean, for artists, we've had this incredible luxury. For the reclusive artists, we've had the incredible luxury of just doing what we do, right? Being where we live and doing what we love. It's incredible privilege. And but we're all tired of it, right? We're all tired of it. And if I could say anything, it has nothing to do with film or animation. And of course, that's kept us all happy. Our moments of happiness have probably come as much through the cultural production of people like you and well, even me, right? But I just want everybody to hang in there and to follow public health orders and to watch films, and if you make them, to keep on making. Like, it really is worth doing. The landscape's changing, everything's changing all the time, but there's always room for one more voice. Lovely.
Well, Anne-Marie, I just want to say this has been eye-opening for me because I've known you for many, many years now, and so we've gotten to some stuff that I had never heard before, which is always exciting and exhilarating for me. But also, I think the biggest takeaway for me is it's just like, just make the damn film you want to make, right? You know, I think that's really the
Well,
takeaway I have from this, is that if you're going to make
that's,
something,
that's easy to say. I think I'm going into waters where I will not be able to make exactly the film I want to make. You know, it's going to
sure.
be collaboration on different levels. So yeah, you know, but if you keep it small, you can, you know, and yeah, we can all, yeah, there's a lot of pleasure in that.
Well, it's great. Well, thank you so much for your time tonight, and I look forward to having many more conversations with you. I'm
Well,
sure. We
thanks,
will.
Jeff. And yeah, one day we'll switch this around. I'll go into the world of Jeff Chiba Stern.
Yeah, it's a strange world at the moment. But anyways, great. Thanks, Anne Marie. Have a good night.
Bye.